So welcome to everyone joining us this afternoon in Cambridge for our session today, Keeping Our Schools Healthy. Welcome everyone. It's wonderful to see so many joining us for this amazing session. I know we're going to have an incredible conversation about keeping our schools healthy. We'll start in just a minute. Welcome again. It's wonderful to see that we have so many joining us for this conversation this afternoon. We're going to start in probably just about 10 more seconds. We'll let people get settled in. So hello everyone again. My name is Bridget Terry Long and I am the Dean and Sayers Professor of Education and Economics at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. Welcome to today's episode for Education Now, our first of the academic year, and part of a larger webinar series launched in response to the dramatic changes in the field of education in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. Perhaps fittingly, today we are proud to present this Education Now episode jointly with our colleagues from the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. I'm really looking forward to today's conversation on health in schools and the unique interconnections that are so especially vital during these uncertain times. We hope you'll find practical ideas and inspiration as we discuss not only actionable steps educators can take, but also the larger equity issues as well as we all navigate this challenging school year and work to support our communities. But first, I want to let you know that today's episode is being recorded and will be available to view on the Harvard Education YouTube channel and Facebook page. You can also visit hgse.me/ednow for recordings and information about future episodes. You can submit your questions using the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and you will also find closed caption access there as well. Now, I am delighted to welcome my co-moderator, Michelle Williams, Dean of the Harvard Chan School and the Angelopoulos Professor in Public Health and International Development at the Chan School and Harvard Kennedy School. We are also joined by a panel of research and practice leaders from the Harvard Graduate School of Education and the Chan School of Public Health, who each bring distinct perspectives and expertise to this conversation. From the Chan School, Joseph Allen, an expert on healthy buildings and healthy schools, and Natalia Linos, whose work thoughtfully connects healthcare and human rights. And from the Ed School, Mira Levinson, who's doing pioneering work to develop the field of educational ethics and has grappled with the complexities imposed by the pandemic, and Josephine Kim, who is an expert on cross-cultural, multi-health, mental health, and student support issues. So welcome everyone. Dean Williams, or Michelle, what is on your mind as we embark on this new school year in this phase of the pandemic?
Thank you, Bridget, Dean Terry Long. It's such a wonderful opportunity to co-host this session with you, something that we've talked about wanting to work together for quite some time. And I'm excited about this opportunity that we have to talk about our schools and the mission that both of our schools serve. I'll tell you what's on the top of my mind is something that we have in common. You know, education, like public health, are the taproot, the seed corn, or if you will, the bedrock of all that drives and sustains civil society. It's where innovation comes from. It's where our economic drivers are allowed to thrive on all channels. It's where really we build and co-create the society that we live in. And yet, despite the fundamental important, significant contributions that both of our disciplines make, sometimes our efforts go unnoticed. When we're successful, especially, our efforts go unnoticed. So I think it's interesting that this pandemic has brought more people to really think collectively about what our disciplines represent. When I became dean, I used to say in a very sort of cheeky kind of way that public health is everywhere and nowhere. It's everywhere when things go well, and it feels like it's nowhere when, for example, our water sources are contaminated. And I think it's the same kind of concept that exists in education, where I'm reminded, as I was thinking about this session, how year after year, every August, we see public human interest stories of teachers buying supplies for underserved schools and the kids that they serve. And that you can, like clockwork, see that happen every year. And it occurs to me that we as a society haven't really gone upstream to really interrogate what are the factors that make that happen, and why are we telling that same story over and over again? So that's what's on my mind, that we share a lot in common, but we also share this very primary role in society, and keeping our schools open and safe is something that has become a conversation on top of mind. Let me just share one little vignette with you. Midway through the pandemic, I was in a consultation with a Fortune 500 CEO executive, and he was exclaiming how important it was for him to get his 140,000 employees back to work. And you know what? The one thing that was keeping him and his aspiration from really being fully realized, it was that schools were closed. He saw schools in a completely different way because of the pandemic. And I share this vignette because I think it's illustrative of the kind of appreciation that this crisis, this economic, health, social, medical, public health crisis has brought an awareness to what we do. And this is a moment for us to really engage in the conversation like what we're about to do. How can we keep our schools open and allow for the work that is at the bedrock of our society to carry forward in a way that is sustainable and safe for our teachers and our learners? So thanks for opening up this academic year with such an important session.
Thank you so much, Michelle. And again, welcome to the many participants on this call. I know we have some joining us from China as well as Texas, both near and far. We're so glad that you could join and be part of this conversation. And thank you again, Michelle, for underscoring the connections between health and education. The two have always been intertwined, but the COVID pandemic certainly has underscored the numerous ways that we are connected. And you gave a wonderful example of that. You know, if you care about education, you should care about health. Healthy kids translates into the opportunity for high quality learning. And the opposite is most certainly true. There are numerous studies that document that poor health is related to lower academic achievement. Simply put, it's hard to concentrate and to learn if your health is suffering. Let us also recognize that school leaders are public health practitioners. Educators are part of the front line, and schools, from early child care centers to K through 12 and higher education, have had to grapple with complex issues and uncertainty as they work both to protect and support the development of millions of students. And they've been thrust into larger debates about COVID precautions while also having to stay grounded in the reality that our students grow quickly and they need systems to support them immediately. And it's not just the students. We're also talking about communities of professionals who are dealing with concerns about their own health. I know many of us have been disheartened by stories of loss, such as the 13 school employees who have died from COVID since mid-August in the Miami-Dade County Public Schools. So this is a crisis that is not only affecting students, it's affecting all of us. And it is important to consider the multiple dimensions of health: physical, mental, and emotional. And so beyond the physical toll, the mental and emotional strain has been substantial. According to a recent study, 71% of parents believe the pandemic has taken a toll on their child's mental health. And you're seeing great interest and understanding that we should have always been protecting and supporting children's mental health, but just how vital and important it is right now. We also know we have many, many children who are dealing with the repercussions of losing a loved one, a caregiver to COVID. The estimate in the US is that more than 46,000 children have lost a parent to COVID. So how can we prepare and support students, educators, and communities in this continuing crisis? And we must realize that the impact has not been equally experienced and felt. The widening of educational opportunity and health gaps between children from different socioeconomic backgrounds is undoubtedly one of the greatest risks of the pandemic. So I look forward to what I'm sure is going to be an engaging and helpful conversation today on keeping our schools healthy. And so with that, I'm going to start turning to our panel members, and I want to begin with Mira. So Mira, everyone has experienced losses to one degree or another during the month since March 2020. I'm wondering, who are you especially concerned about as we go into this fall?
Thanks, Bridget, and thanks so much to you and Michelle for bringing us together for this. This feels like a really special opportunity. I hesitate to rank and say, here's who I'm most concerned about, right? I think that part of what your comments just emphasized is how intertwined we are, right? So, one of the things that, say, actually with my philosopher hat on, that I've been so perplexed by is why and how as a society we've been willing to sacrifice our children's well-being for the sake of certain forms of adult well-being. For example, our interest in, say, keeping certain kinds of adult recreational settings open, even as schools have been closed. Like, that's just seemed sort of morally indefensible to me. And at the same time, though, as you just mentioned, children are part of families, right? Every child needs, and most children have, right, at least one adult who they're close to, who's caring for them, right? And so we can't think about children separate from the families and the communities that they're part of, nor can we think about children's and students' well-being separate from the well-being of teachers, school administrators, custodians, bus drivers, cafeteria workers, et cetera. So I guess when you ask me, like, who am I most concerned about? What I think I will say I am most concerned about our seeing people and schools and groups as members of interest groups who are in opposition to one another and are getting caught up in that. And I'm most hoping that we can start to take a more holistic approach to thinking about the holistic health and development of children, which is, as you just said, is about their academic learning, their social learning, their emotional learning, their mental well-being, their physical well-being, their opportunities to play, and that you need healthy and supported cohorts of adults around them to enable that adult development and that child development. And so I think who I'm most worried about are communities and schools and families that are feeling torn apart rather than supported to put things back together. And we are especially, I think, tearing apart the communities that, unfortunately, especially in the United States, we've always done the least good job of putting back together, and we actually physically tore asunder, right, in the times of slavery and so forth, which are our low-income communities and our communities of color. And that's where I think we all need and deserve to be put back together and to be made whole. But those are communities that I fear are often really at the center of some of the divisiveness right now.
So Mira, I really appreciate that response. And you're so right that there is a level of interconnectedness that we have to always appreciate. And a real strong thread is this this appreciation that we have to take a systems-wide approach when we go about trying to understand how to position our schools, the communities in our schools, to do the teaching and learning. But then there is this larger ecosystem that's also connected and has a vested interest and a responsibility to play. So I really appreciate that. I think what this pandemic has really done is open our eyes to just how interconnected we are and how solutions for challenges like COVID and maintaining our schools as a safe place for teaching and learning will require stakeholders to be engaged in ways they might not have always been engaged pre-pandemic. So I really appreciate that response. I'd like to, Bridget, if I may, ask Joe Allen to enter the conversation. And Joe, your work gives people, educators, families, students, so many great tools that they might use to activate in their communities to prioritize safety. I wonder if you could give us a bit of a checklist, if you will, of what to do, what to look for, and what we can do now to advocate for and sustain that safe environment that Mira so eloquently spoke about our needing.
Yeah, so happy to, and thanks for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here with you, Michelle and Bridget, colleagues across Harvard. One of the maybe the only good parts of the pandemic here is that we've forged these closer connections and worked closely with Mira and just have learned so much. Right, and so my field is focusing on healthy buildings and thinking about the infrastructure that either can make us sick or keep us well, and also thinking about historically how we got here. I don't think a lot of people know, well, a lot of people are recognizing now the importance of the indoor environment. Nearly all the transmissions happening indoors. Words like ventilation and filtration finally have entered the lexicon more fully. That's great. But it wasn't, the reason we have this problem in the first place is because years ago, 40 years ago, we started to set our building standards for bare minimums, not for health, not for student well-being, not for teacher success and performance, but bare minimums, not for health at all. And the standard by name is called the Standard for Acceptable Indoor Air Quality. So when did acceptable become acceptable? It's objectively not, and it's quite frustrating. And when we look at what's happened at schools and everywhere else, and I'll get to the tips at the end, but I want to set the stage here for a second. If you think about these minimum ventilation rates, and I'll put some numbers on it, maybe 3 air changes per hour, and your home gets about half an air change. So schools, about 3 air changes per hour. That's a minimum standard. Most schools are only getting half of that. So we're not even at that minimum standard, and it gets worse. It gets worse. If you look at the data on ventilation in some school districts, the schools that are predominantly Black and Hispanic students get even less ventilation rates. And in schools that are majority free or reduced lunch, even lower. So we have this standard not set for health. We're not meeting it. We have neglected our buildings for decades, and we find ourselves in this position wondering why we have so much spread happening everywhere. And so it's actually not that hard, just to give some quick tips on how we can fix this. So at its simplest, we want to enhance the ventilation and filtration. Why? As we talk and sing and breathe, we're emitting these respiratory aerosols that can carry the virus. And if you think of it like cigarette smoke, that can build up in a room, so much so that we're breathing in the air of everyone else in that room all of the time. And you have 2 ways to really remove this out of the building, out of the school or any other building. You bring it out of the building through ventilation, or you clean it out of the air through filtration. And so we really just made it quite simple. We're recommending 4 to 6 air changes per hour through these 3 factors. 1, bring in more outdoor air. It can be as simple as opening up the windows sometimes. 2, increase the level of filtration on your mechanical systems, what we call a MERV 13 filter, MERV 13. And 3, if you can't make those fixes, your system can't handle it, your system's too old, you can supplement this with a portable air cleaner with a HEPA filter, plug and play device, relatively inexpensive, and can be a quick fix. And that's a way to get kids back in school so we're not suffering these consequences. As we keep an eye on the bigger problem here, we have to make the fundamental fixes to our building infrastructure that we've just neglected for so long.
Joe, if I may, some of the schools may not have the technical expertise or access to your technical expertise, and they may also not have the information, the data, to make those evidence-based decisions on which of the three actions to take. Can you speak a little bit more granularly about how, the lesser among us, those schools with the least amount of access to technical expertise and resources, might be able to rank and deploy these three interventions that you're describing?
Yeah, it's a great comment, and it's a particular concern because we do finally have some money coming here through the American Rescue Plan. And one of our biggest concerns is that the money is being misspent through no fault of the schools. You get this money, not quite sure what to do. And we see a lot of money being spent or wasted on unproven technologies, plexiglass, deep cleaning, when these fixes we're talking about can provide benefits against COVID, other infectious diseases, and provide decades of benefits in terms of cognitive function and other indicators of well-being and performance. So we put out a lot of resources. Now, maybe we'll put one in the chat, but Mira and I worked together on the Lancet COVID-19 Commission on the Task Force for Safe Work and Safe School. And we've written a really short report that kind of walks through these and says, here's what to look for. We talk about these 4 to 6 air changes per hour. One, first step, commission your systems. It's like, think about getting a tune-up for your building. We do this for cars. We don't do it for our buildings all the time, but we should. Find out what's going on in your system. Saves energy, saves money, also improves indoor air quality. Open up the windows, open up the outdoor air dampers a bit more, bring in more outdoor air. That's the priority because natural ventilation or more fresh outdoor air provides a lot of these other benefits. Then we resort to filtration or air cleaning, particularly important when it's hot or really cold, or you have wildfire smoke and you can't bring in more outdoor air. Well, then you can rely on filtration. So we can share this in the link, and we've tried to simplify. We have a couple of resources from my Harvard Healthy Buildings team to try and demystify this a bit, so that to give all these schools the tools and be sure and help them spend this stimulus money in a way that can provide long-term benefit.
Thanks so much. And I know you practice what you preach.
That's
yes,
right.
Thank you so much, Joe. I've had the pleasure of being on panels with you before, and I have to say I learned quite a bit about MERV filters this summer as a dean myself. But I want to make sure we bring in the other members of this fantastic panel and then hopefully get to more conversation with them between each other, given the wealth of knowledge they have. So Josephine, I wonder if you could join and help us unpack the emotional baggage that students may present with this year, and what can and should schools do to support mental health among the push to get back to normal or make up for lost time?
Yes, and first, thank you for recognizing that mental health is a thing, because I think that's really part of the issue, that when we talk about health, we don't often include, as Mira said, this holistic health, including our psychological health. So stressors, as you can imagine, are immense. Even before the COVID-19 entered the scene, I would venture to say we were actually fighting a double pandemic already, one of racism and the other of mental health issues. And now after some 500 plus days of the pandemic, when we talk about keeping schools healthy, we can't but give voice to the psychological health of our students. If our focus before was putting out fires in terms of intervening when things happened, I would say now we really do need to focus on preventing, right? And recognizing that everyone's impacted. So again, let's first establish mental health is a thing. We're all impacted by it. It is the state of our emotional, psychological, and social well-being. So we all, right, have mental health. Schools should care deeply about it because ultimately it influences how students are motivated, how they focus, how they engage. And we know those levels ultimately impact their achievement, right? And so students who are entering schools obviously have many vulnerabilities. And the one question I would implore our schools to ask, right, by way of policies and practices, are we either mitigating those vulnerabilities or are we unfortunately accentuating them? Because we can either, right, ease the process for our students, or we could do things that actually make things worse. So broadly, what can schools do? I think of two things mainly right now. One of them would be, really increasing the mental health literacy of our educators, because they really are the first responders, purely by default, because they have the most access to our students. We're talking 6 to 8 hours. Right? And so educators being the first to observe when students are in need of more support. For example, students are now entering, as we talked about, with trauma. The grief and loss is immense. But do they understand that depression, for example, in youth can come across as anger and opposition. So if we knew things like this, then we might treat, right, and approach students who are displaying those types of things a little bit differently. This is a great opportunity to really maximize and utilize your school counselors, because this is what they do all day long, right? And hire maybe a few more would be my recommendation. The second thing is to really create schools that promote and advance the psychological safety of our students, especially for students who are coming in with marginalized identities. I mean, we know, for example, representation matters. You know, when students are represented in faces of those who are in positions of power at schools, when they can picture themselves in the stories that are told in front of the classrooms, when they can relate to the physical spaces that they have to roam through, when they see a direct link between what they're studying and their real lives, right? All of this really helps to increase, for example, their sense of belonging, and it minimizes destructive mental processes, things like the imposter syndrome, stereotype threat, which then does increase psychological safety, ultimately promoting mental health achievement and engagement. So I would say let's teach in ways that really utilize student voices, their languages, the cultures that they're bringing in, and their identities as foundations for their learning. So I'll stop there for now.
Thank you, Josephine. Really appreciate that. And just a reminder, be sure to use the Q&A function. We're hoping to get to your questions in just a little bit. And I already see a question in the Q&A box. This is really both about K through 12 and higher ed. Really the whole pipeline. I think one thing that's been incredibly interesting over the last 18 months is how connected and how the issues that we're grappling with oftentimes are the same. And I'm so happy to see that commonality be realized. But let me pass it to Michelle.
Yeah, thank you, Bridget. My next question, I want to bring Natalia into the conversation. And so Natalia, directed to you, you know, what can we do? What can we do to make all students and families, especially those in disproportionately affected communities, feel safe and cared for?
Thanks so much, Michelle, for this question. And thank you all for hosting this discussion. And I want to start by acknowledging that many of us, and I speak both as an epidemiologist and as a parent of 3 young kids, we're hoping to be entering this school year in a different way. You know, my 3rd grader had her 1st grade interrupted, all of her 2nd grade, now her 3rd grade. It is frustrating, whether you're a parent, whether you're a teacher, whether you're a student. And I think in this moment of anxiety around Delta, I think it's important to acknowledge that we are in a better place. We have tools, and you know, Joe obviously spoke about ventilation, but since it hasn't been said yet, we know that universal masking works. We know that the way to keep kids safe who can't be vaccinated is to vaccinate everybody around them who can be, anybody above the age of 12. We know that there are ways to mitigate workplace exposure to keep parents safe. And we need to acknowledge that some kids, most kids, need to be seen as part of their family. And that has been said, but I think it is important to recognize that what we know from public health is that communities of color have been hit harder, low-income workers. We know that communities, families that live in multi-generational households have been harmed more. So recognizing that, unfortunately, this conversation of keeping our schools safe really means keeping our community safe. And so this isn't something we can solve alone. When we are facing, for example, a challenge of maybe evictions coming back into the picture, or workplaces demanding that their workers come to work so that a parent who has a child who needs to quarantine has no solution. I think we need to recognize that schools can't solve for this alone, and recognize what a good job teachers are doing right now. So I think as a social epidemiologist, I'm not an infectious disease epidemiologist. I think it's important to recognize that we're not going to solve this case by case, recognizing that there are patterns, that there are some families, and really designing our policies to meet those people who have always fallen through the cracks and right now may be much more impacted because one, you mentioned, Dean Long, that 40,000 children have lost a parent. That is not random. It is children who are most likely your children that were struggling already before, children that were living in precarious situations, children whose parents were not able to stay home. So recognizing that we need to solve for those children and their families is really important. So I'm happy to be part of this conversation. I also want to acknowledge that we don't have all the answers because the science is always changing, and recognizing that the trust between teachers, politicians, public health officials, and parents requires that we are honest with what we know right now, and knowing that our policies may need to change. What we believe right now is X, but in 6 months we may need to reevaluate. And keeping schools safe requires that we lower the transmission and basically the exposure for our whole community, number one.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. That was really helpful. And no, we don't know everything, but you gave a nice summary of kind of where we are. And I think the recognition that science is a learning process, that we continue to get new information and have to adapt. But the other thing that you mentioned is, politics is also involved. Politicians are also involved. And so one of the things that educators far and wide and school boards and, so many others who really were focused on education, all of a sudden got drawn into these politically infused debates and polarization. And so I want to open it up to all four of our panelists and just ask, do you have advice? Because the reality was schools were going to open. And even while there were these debates going on, educators, leaders, individual parents, individual teachers had to make decisions. So what can we do to support them, and how can we learn, or what steps can we take to try to act more constructively across differences, misperceptions, heightened emotions, misinformation, and so on? So I'll open it up. And Mira, yes, I am looking at you.
Yeah, sure. I'll jump into this. I think this is such an important and such a hard question, right? Because as you note, there are conflicts in some cases that are at the classroom level, right? The school level, at the district level, and then say conflicts between districts and states, right? So districts that say want to impose mask mandates and states that have outlawed mask mandates, et cetera. And I think so much of what we are seeing right now in schools and around schools and who we should be serving and how we should be serving them is a reflection of a larger breakdown in trust that we are seeing in the United States, and I think in many places. I'm really amazed. They're just skimming through the questions and seeing, wow, we have hellos really from all over the world, right? And it is so hard, right, as a parent, and I really appreciate Natalia talking about, her 3 young children, right? As a parent, we are desperate to make sure that our own children are safe and healthy, right? Like that is a baseline, right? And if we can't trust, or if we feel that we cannot trust other adults to care for our children as much as we care for our children, then it can lead to huge conflicts, right? We go sort of to mama bear mode, right? And protection. And right now, when we have mistrust around the science, also mistrust, frankly, among educators, administrators, parents, community members, mistrust along political lines, right? That makes it so hard to come together and to say, we actually all do want the same things, right? Because we don't trust that the others want the same things as we want. And so I think one of the things, so Joe and I wrote a paper recently, published a paper on health equity and schooling and the social determinants of learning that talks about kind of the retail politics that we think is needed in schools, in the same way that we've seen retail politics happen around vaccine hesitancy, right? So many of the people who feel schooling hesitancy, who feel hesitant to send back their own children or to go into children as teachers or as bus drivers or so forth, right? They don't trust that their health or their children's health is important enough to others, right? To make them trust to come back. And in vaccine hesitancy, what you've seen is it can't just be public service announcements. It can't just be, like this celebrity saying, look, I got a jab, you should too. It has to be so much about, let me hear what your concerns are. let me try to respond to them. Let me listen. Let me take an attitude, like a humble attitude of trying to understand who you are, where you're coming from, and how we can meet the needs that you feel that you have. And I think we need to do that at a school and classroom and district level as well. Because that we see beautiful articles in Chalkbeat and the New York Times and the Washington Post and Ed Week about schools that are managing to bring back 90% or more of their kids. And in almost every case, what we see there are school leaders, educators, and staff who are reaching out, inviting parents and families in, doing the work of going to parks, to faith organizations, to playgrounds, having people come and tour. And I think that's what once we get back to the personal connection, then we stop thinking about each other as these like political categories, and we can start recognizing that we actually are human beings who are trying to serve kids and families well.
Thank you, Mira. I think that building a relationship where one can draw down on the currency of that relationship during times of crisis, where trust really is fundamental for working our way out, is important. And we have to, as we think about, emerging from this pandemic, is how do we invest in building those relationships back so that we can have the trust needed for when the next time our resiliency is challenged. I wanted to address another question that a listener has posted. And Joe, I think this one might be directed to you, but any of the panelists feel free to chime in. One listener is interested in thinking about how we can frame the work with healthy school buildings as a young person, as a young cohort, human rights issue. Folks I talk to, says the listener, seem to relate well with the idea that this is a young person's human rights issue. Anyone, Joe, but anyone, welcome to grapple with this very important concept.
Maybe I'll start and I'll keep it short. But we wrote a paper in Science calling for a paradigm shift. I think the listener's question is right. You think about what we do in terms of access to food, or we do have food security and food safety, or clean drinking water. And we just don't have the corollary for the air we're breathing all day indoors. We're an indoor species. We're breathing air indoor all day in our work, our cars, airplanes, schools. And we don't think about it the same way. That clean air is a fundamental right. The World Health Organization talks about this for a long time. My field, indoor air quality, healthy buildings, whatever you want to call it, is so small compared to other fields out there. I think I know all the researchers in the world who do this. Honestly, it's just a really small group, but it's getting the attention it deserves. And the listener's exactly right. So it requires us to flip how we've been thinking about this. And we've been accepting these acceptable minimum standards. And it's not just about health, right? It's not just disease avoidance where everyone's focused on now. But really, we have a report, over 200 studies showing how the school building influences student health, student thinking, and student performance, even minor changes as we think about air quality, but also thermal conditions and health, especially relevant for a changing climate. We've seen schools close this week because of heat stress and heat days. This has an impact on students' thinking and test performance. We can link all of this through to the building and the performance of the building, and we just haven't placed indoor air quality where it should be. We're breathing this air all day, and it's having a profound impact on our health.
That's great. I wondered if Josephine or Natalia would add to Joe's response.
I'm happy to jump in with sort of my health and human rights hat, just to say that, obviously health is a human right, access to education is a right of children. And I think if we even think about it in that perspective, we are requiring children to go to school as a government. Therefore, the government has an obligation to make sure that that setting is safe and healthy across all the dimensions. Indoor air quality is something that I don't think we've thought about before COVID, but I agree with Josephine's comments earlier that mental health, we need to make sure that schools are safe from a mental health perspective, that they are safe from, their water pipes should not have lead in them. So really thinking about that, we as the government, not we, has a responsibility to not only educate the children, but also think about the built environment. And, public health talks a lot about, how neighborhoods, how your environment, your actual built environment, your housing conditions, how your schools impact your health. That is part of the social determinants of health. And it's wonderful to see this conversation happening and people like Joe really stepping in and saying, health is a human right, clean air is a human right, our children need to live there. So I agree, and I'm fully for that framing.
Yeah, I'll jump in because I definitely want to pull Josephine into this conversation and ask a related question. I think, what we've already talked about are some concrete things that need to be done for buildings, but also the personal relationships that are equally important as well, as Mira discussed. But with all of this, Josephine, the mental health piece of it is important, again, both for the educators and for the students. And looking at one of the questions, the person describes the fact that, we've been at this already for 18 months. It's not as if we're starting the school year at 100% for any of us. And the feelings of being overwhelmed because whether it's school administrators or teachers, parents, they're doing so many extra things along the way. So given those conditions, what is your advice in terms of what are concrete things we can do to support the mental health, both of the educators and of the students, given, we've already been at this for a while and it looks like, we still have a long road ahead.
Right. And I think that's the most difficult part about this. We can't predict when it's going to end. I mean, wouldn't it be great if we had a date and, this was all a moot point? But that's the thing. And I think what I worry about the most with our young children, especially, is that they're not seeing examples of adults getting along. In fact, they're not seeing good models of doing, conflict resolution or problem solving. So that's one of the issues I'm having. But, in the classroom, again, because I'm much more of a kind of a grounds-on, direct care type of person, what are things that we can do? One, let's create spaces to talk about it. Every single culture, from what research shows, is that when we begin to actually acknowledge and recognize and also create some space where we can let go and release some of the anxiety, that actually helps us, right? Because it frees up the mental capacity of our students. And so maybe that means as an adult educator, I'm coming into the classroom, and I have to admit, I did this myself the other day in one of my classes, where I said, gosh, today it was really hard to show up, right? Was that anybody else with me on that? And so again, just by recognizing this is where I am and here I am, showed up anyway, right? But it took a lot of work. You're here. Anybody feeling the same? Can we talk about that briefly? Let some of that anxiety out before we get to the content of what it is that we need to learn. And we're finding that when students have those small opportunities to release and peel away some of the layers of their anxiety, that actually helps them to do better, right? And same thing with grief and trauma, having these brief moments where people are acknowledging this is a thing, you must be impacted. We're here, so what are some things we can do, right? That's going to help us focus.
Josephine, I really appreciate that mindset that you bring to this conversation. And I wanted to, it resonates with one of the questions a listener has posted. And that is, first it begins, it's not really a question, it's a statement, but I think your response speaks well to this. The listener says, I'm concerned about a generation that's losing hope and is no longer seeing a future. But I think we have a role and a responsibility to turn that around. And I think your answer begins to get to that point. Can you identify just some concrete actions that this listener and others who are deeply concerned about the potential losses and their durability on this generation of learners?
Yes, and thank you for, I think, even just naming the hopelessness is kind of relieving, isn't it? That somebody else is thinking about this, they're not the only one. And so I think normalizing and validating these feelings goes a long way. Again, saying, I'm as an adult feeling this way, and I do have some agency and some coping skills. I'm wondering how you might be feeling, right? And then again, creating some space around that. It's so complicated. And I think there are students that really do need additional support. For example, we've got high schoolers who are now working full time while trying to, manage schooling because their parents have been laid off, for example. We have students who are literally saying, I've been to a funeral every other weekend, right? And so if you know that a student is in that situation in your classroom, it's kind of a no-brainer that as a caring adult, right, that we're going to check in. You know, the other day, I just did a brief, quick check-in in the chat, and these are graduate students, right? What is one feeling, right, that you're bringing into the space today? And people were just writing everything from jet lag to excitement, frazzled, you know, all sorts of things. And there was a word that came up and it said depressed. Right. So immediately, right, I gave voice to that. Yes, I can resonate with that. And I would really want us to touch base about that later too. Right. And so doing it in such a way where, of course you are, right, again, validating and normalizing. And then can we actually meet to talk about that to make sure that they are indeed safe? Right. Because then it gets into, you know, are there thoughts of harming yourself? These are things that, you know, by the way, September is National Suicide Awareness Month, right? And so it's important to talk about it. And what's fascinating about the research and a hesitation that educators have about giving voice to these matters is that there's a fear that we might be instilling ideas in our students. But research works against that every time and says, actually, they find it relieving when somebody finally asks.
Thank you so much, Josephine. Yeah, and I wonder, there was a question about, you know, are we actually building resiliency? I mean, this is an opportunity where adults can be modeling, you know, real investigation, exploration, that it's okay to talk about these issues, or they can be modeling something else. So it could go either way. I want to acknowledge for everyone, we'll be sharing a set of resources after this. I know there are a lot of questions asking about the most recent data, the most recent studies, and additional recommendations and resources from this panel. But I want to ask everyone a question that's come out in several of the questions submitted in the Q&A that gets to this question is of whether or not we have to make a choice between health and education. And let me make this very concrete for you. You know, two very limited resources we have are both money and time. And so even with the stimulus money, you know, how should schools think through spending on buildings versus spending on mental health services versus spending on academic curriculum to help learners who may have fallen behind? And then time, you know, if we are giving more time to thinking about mental health, does it mean we're taking away? How do you wrestle with this? Is it an either or is it actually reinforcing and for the good of all? I open it up.
I'm happy to jump in on the building side again, in particular. I've been thinking about this in the prioritization, and I think, as we've seen from everyone's comments, they're all linked. So, right, if kids are healthy, teachers are healthy in school, that helps the parents, everyone feels better. We're not losing lives to the virus. So they're all interlinked. I guess the way I've been thinking about this, we're in an emergency, and we've had an unbelievable number of kids just missing from schools over the past year. It's a national crisis that really wasn't addressed. And so I've done a lot of work on these, forensic investigations when there's been a sick building, a cancer cluster, some problem in a building, and you have to put in a control to rectify that immediately. So I think there are some steps we can take right away. And it might be too much to think about your building and the leaky pipes, the lead, the mold, moisture, pest infestation, but let's do the basics and control this virus. Simple things, open up the windows, these portable air cleaners, relatively cheap, and there's money available for them. That's a simple fix. It's plug and play technology. You don't really have to know much. Size the device right. We have tools to help you to size the devices right. Second, I really think we need to take advantage of the newfound attention finally around these rapid tests that let you know if someone is actively infectious. We've been quarantining thousands of kids unnecessarily. Quarantine is a blunt instrument when you don't have information. The rapid tests give us that information. So instead of keeping everyone out of school, we can have a test and stay or a test to stay program. So simple things to clean the air, some simple tools that tell us if kids are actively infectious can help keep them in the school while we deal with the crisis and while we think about these bigger issues we need to resolve for longer term resiliency. But for me, it's right now, how do we get kids in school and keep them safe and keep the staff and teachers safe as well?
Can I build on what Joe is saying? Because I think it has always been a mistake to see these as trade-offs, right? We know, I remember, that justifications being given, say, for universalizing the free breakfast program, because kids who eat breakfast, are demonstrated to have higher test scores. And my feeling is, well, yeah, but don't we want to feed kids breakfast? Like, this is terrible that our justification for feeding kids is, say, that their test scores go up. But it is also true, right, that their test scores go up and that they tend to be more academically engaged, right? I've learned so much from working with Joe and his ventilation colleagues and so forth about the ways in which healthy buildings really do help kids' physical health, mental health, cognitive health, right? Their learning, their socialization. This was not a surprise to me, having, say, been a middle school teacher where we dealt with mold, we dealt with rodents and many other things with totally inappropriate temperatures, and seeing how that disrupted our classroom, right? I was like, yes. But I think it's super important for us to realize that schools, particularly in the United States, are the venue through which we deliver almost every social service in this country. Schools feed kids, schools provide therapeutic services, physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy, right? Emotional and behavioral supports. 95% of kids who access mental health services access them initially through the school. Kids in many communities get the majority of their physical health services, their nurses and doctors' visits through the school. Schools connect families with job programs, with English language learning programs, with housing stability programs, with social workers, right? Schools have always been places that we funnel our limited social services for kids through. And we know from research that some colleagues and I've done on a working group on COVID in schools that on average, the average kid last year missed 55 days of school, had zero contact with any sort of school person, any teacher. That doesn't count all the days where their contact was, say, a half-hour circle time or a 10-minute email with the teacher, right? So we know that kids simply have zero contact for at least a third of their education and limited contact for more than that. And when you have schools that are providing all of these services for kids, we can't treat it as an either or as a which do we prioritize. We have to recognize that getting students into schools safely serves them and their families and their communities. That's how we serve kids, is not through this sense of trade-offs.
Thank you so much. Yes, that really appreciate both of those perspectives. I'm looking at the time and I know we're nearly getting to the end, but I do want to reach out and recognize we have a global audience. It is so wonderful that we have folks joining us from Malaysia, Bangladesh, India, Qatar. Welcome. Obviously, these issues are important, not just in the US, but really we're seeing them globally, and hopefully we can share lessons across our borders to really improve things. As we get to the end, I want to ask all of our panelists, what are we not talking about? What are we missing in these conversations? Obviously, there are lots of questions about masking, and we'll share more resources, questions about ventilation and buildings, mental health, but what are we not asking? And it may be a nuance to an existing question. If we could have each of the four just give a last comment as we get to the end of the session. Natalia, do you mind going first?
Sure, I'm happy to jump in. I think something we haven't explicitly talked about today is children with disabilities and how they have possibly fallen behind more dramatically, and also how their disabilities may actually be posing a risk to them that is higher than other children from COVID. So I feel really that we need to start thinking about both the educational and the health risks for children with disabilities and be open about them, acknowledge them, figure out a plan for those children. The other missing link, obviously, and because you talked about the global, is that the United States has access to vaccines, right? That is our best tool right now. And we know that states like Massachusetts, where the large majority of eligible adults have been vaccinated, children are not dying, but in states where that is not happening, they are. So the inequities at the global level, you use the statistic that 46,000 children had lost a parent in the US. Globally, that number is 1.5 to 2 million children. And so we need to understand that the global inequities in education will take longer because the vaccination is taking longer. So those are two sort of stories that I hope we will continue to talk about.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yes. And I saw a study as well. They said at minimum globally, it's at least 2 million children that have lost a parent or grandparent caregiver. Josephine?
Yes, I was going to say, I think the one thing that's perhaps missing for me is I think the pandemic, ironically, has really highlighted many of the things that we're now forced to look at. The piece that I wish we would have done is even pre-pandemic, really examine, right, and do this. If we would have done some of this work, I think pre-pandemic, preemptively as a prevention method, I wonder if things might be a little bit different for us now.
I'll follow up there, and I'll keep in my domain, but and I do want to echo Natalia's comment that the vaccines are the way out of this. That's the way to protect kids right now. And really, we're seeing these discrepant disparities across the US and globally. So that's a really fine point, and we can't emphasize it enough. As we think about buildings and infrastructure, the thing I'd want to emphasize is really that, or the story that's not being told, is why aren't these funds being used to fix the infrastructure problems we've known about for 40 years in our schools? And why are we hundreds of millions of dollars, without exaggeration, being spent on unproven technologies? Who is selling this to these kids? How is this slipping through the system and being sold? And some of it, quite honestly, is snake oil. And that story has not been fully told. We see it happening all over the place. So we need to get the right message out there and what works, and start to shift some of this expenditures that are happening towards things that aren't providing a benefit now and won't provide a benefit going forward. That's an untold story. It's a big one, and I don't think it's made top news just yet.
Thank you, Joe. Mira?
So Josephine talked about thinking about what we could have done ahead of time. And I want to say, I think we're not yet looking enough at the long term. And I'll sort of put my philosopher's hat back on, right? So when we talk, say, about something like the inequities in what kids are facing, even inequities in learning loss, which I know is a controversial term, right? There are three different ways I think we could understand those inequities and those losses. One is the loss that a kid is experiencing compared to what they've learned now, compared to what they would have learned if things had been normal. Okay. A second way to understand it is the comparative loss, right? So what some kids have lost in terms of their learning or their mental well-being or actually their nutrition compared to what other kids have lost in that term, at the same time. And then the third is there is concerns, and Natalia talked about this, particularly with students with disabilities and others who are highly vulnerable, who have experienced absolute losses where they were able to do something like speaking complete sentences or express their emotions clearly in a way that enabled them to get what they needed before the pandemic started. And now they are struggling with those very skills that they used to have. As we think about those different ways of understanding inequities in the losses that kids have experienced, and also, some of the gains that they've gotten, that leads us to think really differently about how we might address them, not just now at this time of crisis, but in the long term, over the next 5, 10, 15 years. Because if we care about creating an equitable and just society, we need to understand those different kinds of inequities differently and really plan for them for the long term. And I would love to see some of the long-term thinking start now.
So thank you. Certainly, this is not the end of this conversation. There is so much more that we could discuss, and there are resources that we will share. But I want to pass to Michelle if she has any closing thoughts.
Yeah, Bridget, thank you so much. This has been such a rich conversation. And I just want to add that one thing that we can continue to do is to strategically invest in building building towards the resiliency that we will all need to have. And in response to the, what I wish we will do is I hope that we can continue to drive home a curriculum that brings forward a health literacy that is at a higher level and critical and analytic thinking to help us all make better, stronger decisions when there are threats to our teachers, our learning environment, and our society. And I think a conversation like this, where we're taking science and bringing it out into action, actionable messages that people can deploy, is one very good way for higher ed, for an education institution like ours, to be engaged in problem solving. Thank you, Bridget, and your team for bringing this forward.
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you to all of our panelists. I think one thing that I wish that was underscored in one of the questions submitted is the importance of these kinds of collaborations across disciplines, across fields. We really need to bring our best minds, our best thoughts, and together to form new ideas, new solutions, to share information. And I'm so glad that today, this afternoon, is just one step in that direction with collaborations that you've heard that are ongoing. And I look to the future to see how we can work together. So thank you, everyone, for joining this conversation. Please stay in touch and check out hgse.me/ednow to rewatch this and other episodes. Take care and stay well. Thank you.